High in the Appalachian mountains, where fog drifts between ridges and silence weighs like stone, a brotherhood sealed itself away from the outside world. What began as a choice for strength became a curse that reshaped generations. Sons born without eyes. Boys raised in darkness, told they carried a sacred bloodline untouched by outsiders. Behind their walls of stone and superstition, men clung to a belief that purity was power, even as deformities spread among their kin. This is no legend. It's the chilling true history of the Caldwell men who turned their valley into a prison of secrecy and inherited suffering. Their story ripples through time, a brutal lesson in the dangers of isolation. What drives men to sacrifice their own sons to twisted tradition? And how did these tragedies change the course of science, law, and human resilience? Tonight, we uncover the shadows of Appalachia, where the Caldwell men built a legacy that still echoes with warning. If you want more gripping true histories like this, tap like and subscribe. It keeps us digging into stories the world tried to bury. Share this with a brother or a friend who needs to hear it. Deep within the Appalachian ridges, where mountains stretched like walls against the horizon, a band of men built their world apart. Their valley was fortress and prison, cut off from the march of time. The Caldwell men lived here for generations, their cabins of rough timber blending into the woods. Their creed was strength through blood, purity through brothers. Outsiders were distrusted, often turned away with rifles raised high. Patriarch Jedediah Caldwell, a stern figure with iron-gray beard, ruled the valley with unchallenged authority. His words were law, his beliefs woven into every son and nephew under his command. He preached that mixing with outsiders brought weakness. To him, the mountain itself had chosen their line, forged them strong. Purity of blood was his gospel, repeated endlessly around campfires and hunting trails. The men relied on each other alone, trading only when necessary for powder, steel, or salt. Every other need was met by their own hands, their own rugged determination to endure. Generations of brothers grew into men under Jedediah's command. They hunted deer, trapped foxes, tilled thin soil, and defended their valley with fierce pride. Their lives were hard, but they accepted hardship as destiny. Yet shadows stretched across the valley. Sons were being born with strange deformities. Most haunting of all, some arrived without eyes, smooth skin covering where vision should have been. Silence followed each birth. The Caldwell men whispered explanations drawn from old mountain lore. Some claimed curses, others said chosen blessings. But Jedediah silenced all dissent, declaring such sons marked by strength the outside world could never comprehend. One winter, a boy named Eyeless was born eyeless. His father Thomas wept silently, but Jedediah declared him a vessel of purest blood. The men bowed their heads, trapped between faith and fear. An outsider doctor, William Forrester, once tried entering the valley after rumors spread. He brought books, tools, promises of help, but the Caldwell men met him with shotguns, ordering him to leave forever. Forrester persisted from afar, gathering scraps of testimony from traders who'd glimpsed the Caldwell boys. His notes filled pages, bent spines, twisted fingers, vacant sockets. He suspected truth darker than folklore, truth rooted in bloodlines. Inside the valley, Jedediah's sermons grew harsher. He warned his sons that outsiders sought to weaken them, to steal their secrets. He urged them never to break the chain of blood binding them together. The Caldwell men followed because they knew nothing else. The mountains sealed them off, and their patriarch sealed their minds. To question him meant exile, a fate worse than death in their world. The valley itself mirrored their fate. Trees leaned heavy, rivers ran dark, storms often cut off paths for weeks. Men felt as though the land itself wanted to keep them trapped forever. When night fell, Brothers gathered around roaring fires, recounting tales of ancestors. They spoke of forefathers who tamed beasts, defied soldiers, and endured winters. Their mythology always ended with the same refrain: blood unbroken. But myths could not erase what eyes revealed. Sons with empty sockets stumbled through the cabins. Their brothers guided them, but fear lurked in every heart. Were these children blessed or cursed? None dared ask aloud. Jedediah insisted blindness was proof of strength, that such sons had inner sight surpassing ordinary men. His booming voice declared them chosen vessels. Few believed, but none dared confront him openly. Elias grew into boyhood, guided by touch and sound. He memorized steps of every cabin, recognized each man by his boots. His uncle Joshua marveled at his sharp hearing, yet sorrow lingered in silence. Every birth brought dread. Would the newborn son arrive whole? Or would another eyeless boy emerge, deepening the unspoken terror spreading through the brotherhood? No man voiced it, but all felt the weight. The mountains amplified isolation. News of wars, inventions, railroads, all passed like distant whispers. Caldwell men remained unchanged, trapped in customs older than the country itself. Their world was wood smoke, sweat, and blood bound tightly. Forrester, despite threats, never abandoned his notes. He wrote of genetic dangers, though he lacked the word for it then. He believed intermarriage among brothers and cousins amplified hidden flaws with cruel precision. Jedediah scoffed at such notions. To him, weakness came only from outsiders. Every sermon thundered the same words: "Our blood is strength, purity is power, sons will carry it forward forever." The valley grew quiet with unspoken despair. Behind beards and hard eyes, men feared their legacy was crumbling. Yet still, they clung to the only truth they'd been taught: never let the blood break. Elias and others like him lived half-shadowed lives. They were protected yet burdened, revered yet pitied. Around them, younger brothers wondered whether fate would grant them sons with sight or sons forever blind. The cabin walls seemed to hold secrets too heavy for timber beams. Every creak echoed the same questions. How long could they endure? What price would the Caldwell men pay for their devotion to purity? The Valley of Shadows bore witness. Trees, rocks, rivers, all watched silently as generations of men bound themselves to a cycle neither storm nor time could break. Their prison was not stone, but blood itself. In that silence, history waited. The first chapter of tragedy had been written, and more would come. The Caldwell men could not escape what lay ahead, even as they clung desperately to the creed of their patriarch. Jedediah Caldwell ruled his valley like a king without crown. His beard stretched long, his eyes sharp as flint. To his sons and nephews he was both lawgiver and executioner, unquestioned patriarch of stone resolve. Each morning began with his booming voice echoing across cabins. He gathered his men, lifting a rifle above his head. "Strength comes from blood. Blood comes from brothers. Break that chain, and you break us all." The men listened, heads bowed. Some believed, others obeyed out of fear. Jedediah tolerated no dissent. His word was not suggestion, but decree, carried out with punishments that left scars deeper than whips. Brothers married brothers' sons. Cousins wed cousins. No outsider's name ever joined the records carved into rough wooden boards inside Jedediah's cabin. The valley was not merely land, it was fortress of blood. Every Caldwell boy grew up knowing his destiny. He would marry within, raise more sons, and carry the creed forward. No alternative existed, no door stood open toward the outside world. Jedediah claimed outsiders carried weakness. He spoke of soldiers who once marched through the mountains, men who brought sickness, betrayal, and decay. He reminded his sons that purity alone ensured survival against hostile time. Legends grew under his command. Around fires, he told stories of forefathers conquering wilderness with bare hands. Each tale ended the same. Our blood is iron. Only betrayal can break iron's chain. When whispers arose about blind sons, Jedediah silenced them. He declared such boys blessed with inner vision. Any man daring to question him risked exile, banished into mountains where wolves and starvation waited. Exile was worse than death. Men had seen what became of wanderers. Bones left unburied in ravines told silent stories. Thus no brother spoke against Jedediah, though doubt gnawed silently at their hearts. The patriarch demanded total loyalty. Sons were forbidden to trade with outsiders beyond essential powder or iron. Even then, dealings were brief, conducted under watchful eyes. Jedediah trusted no man beyond his blood. In the valley, silence became tradition. Men spoke little of deformities, less of fear. Work filled their days, chopping timber, tending meager crops, hunting game. At night, hymns to blood purity echoed. Jedediah walked the valley like an emperor inspecting his domain. His cane struck ground in rhythm with his boots. Boys scattered when he passed, not from respect alone, but from raw, bone-deep fear. Every cabin wall carried his rules, etched into wood by blade. Trust only blood. Purity is strength. No outsider shall enter. These mantras shaped the Caldwell men more firmly than any gospel. Jedediah's nephews feared his punishments. He carried no hesitation in using belt, rod, or rifle stock. To him, discipline was love, and pain was necessary to harden men for their sacred duty. When Elias, blind from birth, stumbled into Jedediah's path, silence fell. The patriarch lifted the boy's chin, proclaiming him proof of chosen destiny. Men clapped shoulders uneasily, concealing unease behind forced agreement. Some brothers felt pity for Elias, but pity had no place in Jedediah's world. He ordered them to honor the boy as inner seer, vessel of purity no outsider could ever understand. Rumors reached nearby towns of Caldwell's strangeness. Outsiders spoke of men with hollow stares, rigid traditions, strange rituals. Yet none dared approach. Shotguns guarded trails, and Jedediah's reputation as ruthless leader spread wide. Inside the valley, loyalty was tested constantly. Jedediah demanded oaths by firelight, sons swearing never to betray blood. Those who hesitated bore lash marks. Those who refused were cast into wilderness, never returning. Despite iron discipline, cracks appeared. Younger brothers whispered about trade, about roads, about leaving. Jedediah crushed such thoughts swiftly. Weak men dream of escape. Strong men build kingdoms where others see cages. For Jedediah, his valley was kingdom eternal. He dreamed of statues carved from stone, monuments to purity. He promised his sons their names would echo through ages if they remained faithful to his creed. But his creed carried hidden rot. Each generation of brothers marrying brothers spread deformities further. More blind boys, more twisted spines, more crooked limbs. Jedediah ignored evidence, claiming destiny required sacrifice. Dr. Forrester's notes, gathered from afar, painted grim picture. He wrote of patterns clear as day. Inherited flaws magnified each generation. He feared tragedy beyond repair, yet Caldwell men dismissed his warnings as lies. Jedediah's grip tightened. As age bent his body, his authority grew sharper. Frail or not, his words carried force of thunder. His sons feared him more than storms, wolves, or even death itself. Around fires, some whispered questions. What would happen when Jedediah died? Would chains loosen? Would valley walls break? Yet such whispers faded quickly, crushed beneath centuries of fear and ritual. The patriarch's rule was absolute, but fate stirred. The mountains do not hold secrets forever. Beneath silence and obedience, pressure built, ready to erupt in ways no Caldwell man could contain. The Valley of Shadows grew darker with each passing year. Sons bowed to creed, blind boys stumbled through cabins, and Jedediah's voice echoed endlessly. Blood is iron. Purity is power. We shall endure. Endurance was certain. But at what cost? The Caldwell men were bound tighter than chains, prisoners of their patriarch's will. And in that prison, the seeds of greater tragedy were already taking root. Winter descended upon the valley, pressing heavy snow into every roof and trail. With the cold came another birth, and with it, the dark truth that haunted the Caldwell men more than wolves or hunger. A boy was delivered into the cabin, wrapped in rough blankets, but when his face was revealed, whispers fell silent. Where eyes should have been, only smooth skin stretched across, unbroken, featureless. The father, Jonathan Caldwell, stood trembling, his hands gripping the edge of the wooden bed. Around him, brothers exchanged uncertain glances. Jedediah stepped forward, his booming voice declaring the boy a chosen vessel. Though men nodded, unease rippled among them. No words could disguise the dread swelling in their hearts. Sons without eyes meant something deeper, something no creed of purity could truly explain away. This was not the first. Already several blind boys stumbled through the valley, learning to walk by touch, guided by uncles and cousins. Each new one added to the unspoken weight on every man. By the fire, blind sons sat listening, their heads tilted toward sound. They remembered steps of every cabin, paths of every trail. Their hearing sharpened like blades, yet sorrow shadowed their every breath. The patriarch refused doubt. Jedediah proclaimed such sons prophets of inner vision, men who carried sight beyond the physical. "They hear truth unseen by outsiders," he shouted, his words hammering obedience into reluctant hearts. But behind closed doors, brothers argued. Some whispered of curses, others blamed generations of intermarriage. Yet silence ruled whenever Jedediah approached. His iron will demanded obedience, and fear silenced men better than chains. Dr. Forrester, watching from afar, wrote his suspicions into diaries. He described the eyeless boys as victims of blood too closely bound. "This is not curse," he scribbled. "It is consequence of generations." The Caldwell men never saw those pages, but their unease grew. More sons arrived eyeless, their sockets sealed from birth. Some stumbled into fires, others fell into rivers. Their brothers guided them tirelessly, hiding sorrow. Among the blind was Elias, now older, his movements practiced. He recognized every man by footsteps alone. His uncles praised him as miracle, yet none could ignore his empty sockets, veiled by skin. Elias's strength was undeniable. He hunted rabbits by sound alone, crafted snares with delicate fingers, and moved through cabins without faltering. Yet even his accomplishments could not erase the growing dread among his brothers. As numbers grew, the valley felt cursed. Hunting parties returned with fewer deer, crops yielded less, storms battered roofs. Men whispered that their blind sons were omens, though none dared speak openly before Jedediah. One stormy night, thunder crashing above, a boy without eyes cried endlessly. His father, Samuel Caldwell, tried soothing him, but nothing worked. Jedediah stormed in, proclaiming the boy a divine herald of inner fire. The brothers bowed reluctantly, but their eyes betrayed despair. To raise such sons meant endless burden, guiding them, protecting them, while still upholding Jedediah's creed. It was loyalty stretched to breaking. As more blind boys appeared, cabins filled with echoes of tapping canes, shuffling steps, and uncertain voices. The valley became a place of shadows upon shadows, blindness spreading like fog through generations. Men adapted. They carved handholds into walls, laid stones along paths, and whittled canes for their blind sons. Survival demanded it. Still, every accommodation deepened the realization that purity brought only suffering. Jedediah remained unshaken. He preached louder, declaring sacrifice the price of greatness. Our sons carry burdens because they are chosen. Outsiders call it weakness, but we know it as strength. His followers forced themselves to nod. Yet beneath forced loyalty, fear festered. Brothers whispered of leaving, of seeking help, but the mountains were walls, and beyond them lay only strangers. Fear of exile chained them tighter than any oath. Dr. Forrester grew desperate. He sent letters to state officials, describing Caldwell blindness as public danger. His words warned of tragedy growing unchecked, but bureaucracy moved slowly, and the Caldwell Valley remained sealed. Inside, sons kept being born. Some with eyes, many without. Those blind boys lived half-lives, both revered and pitied. Their presence shaped every conversation, every glance exchanged among the weary Caldwell men. Eyeless, older now, became symbol of resilience. He trained younger blind boys, teaching them to listen for wind, to hear deer moving, to feel soil for storms. His lessons carried hope and sorrow together. Fathers struggled. They loved their sons, yet every eyeless birth reminded them of curses. Each time they forced smiles beneath Jedediah's glare, unwilling to risk exile by questioning his unyielding creed of purity. The valley's silence grew heavier. At night, when fires burned low, men stared into shadows, asking silent questions. How long could they endure? How many more sons would be born without sight? Jedediah's voice thundered endlessly, his sermons silencing doubt. But even he could not erase the truth carved into every blind face. The valley of men was changing, and no creed could halt its course. The sons without eyes had become both burden and prophecy. They were living proof of what the creed had created and harbingers of storms yet to come. Their presence would shape the Caldwell fate forever. Word of the Caldwell sons reached beyond the mountains. Traders carried whispers to nearby towns, describing boys born blind, with sockets sealed from birth. Among those who listened carefully was a physician named Dr. William Forrester. Forrester was unlike the men of the valley. He trusted science more than superstition, knowledge more than folklore. When rumors reached his ears, curiosity turned to concern, and concern hardened into determination to uncover truth. He began collecting every story told by hunters, trappers, and travelers. His notes grew thick, filled with observations of blindness, twisted spines, and crooked limbs. Patterns emerged, all pointing to inbreeding among Caldwell men. Forrester believed knowledge could illuminate their plight. He attempted to enter the valley carrying books and medical tools, but the Caldwell brothers met him at the trailhead, rifles aimed, ordering him to turn back. He left that day, but not defeated. From afar, he began piecing together a case study, gathering testimony from traders who had exchanged furs or salt with Caldwell men. Each account deepened his suspicion. His diaries spoke of an inheritance spiraling inward, where each generation doubled flaws. He suspected a hidden recessive trait magnified by isolation. Though science was young, his intuition sensed something extraordinary and tragic unfolding. Inside the valley, the Caldwell brothers knew only half-truths. Jedediah continued preaching purity, forbidding any discussion of deformities. Yet some younger men wondered whether Forrester's knowledge could hold answers to what haunted their sons. At night, when fires burned low, secret conversations unfolded. Brothers spoke cautiously, fearful of spies loyal to Jedediah. They asked, was science truly enemy? Or could knowledge explain what faith could not? Forrester grew bolder. He wrote letters to Tennessee officials, warning of a crisis brewing in the mountains. He described blind sons as evidence of hereditary collapse, urging intervention before generations of men were lost. But officials dismissed him, reluctant to challenge isolated mountaineers. Respect for tradition outweighed concern for unseen sons. Forrester's warnings gathered dust in archives, ignored by men in offices far from the valley. Still, he persisted. He charted genealogies from scraps of trader testimony. Lines converged into closed circles. Brothers marrying cousins, uncles marrying nephews' sons, blood endlessly recycling. To Forrester, it was clear. Tragedy born of isolation. Meanwhile, Jedediah thundered against science. He warned his sons that doctors were liars, seeking to weaken strong bloodlines. His sermons painted outsiders as thieves of purity, enemies who would corrupt generations with weakness. The conflict became spiritual versus scientific. Inside the valley, faith in Jedediah's creed bound men in silence. Outside, Forrester fought to awaken authorities to a crisis they refused to see. Years passed, and Forrester's journals thickened. He recorded every rumor, another blind boy, another twisted spine. His frustration deepened. "I write these words knowing they may never bring change," one entry read bitterly. The Caldwell men, however, could not ignore reality forever. Sons without eyes grew in number, stumbling through cabins, tapping walls for guidance. Some uncles admired resilience, others wept quietly, hidden from Jedediah's watchful gaze. Forrester described the situation as a cruel experiment conducted by nature, magnified by stubborn will. He compared it to breeding hounds too closely, but with consequences etched on human faces rather than animals. One trader recalled carrying venison to the Caldwell Valley. He described boys with closed sockets, guided by brothers holding their arms. "They moved by sound alone," the trader said, "like bats trapped in daylight." These accounts haunted Forrester. He returned to the trail more than once, always stopped by armed Caldwell men. Their rifles made clear. Outsiders were not welcome. Still, he left notes for anyone brave enough. He warned them, "The blindness will not stop. Each generation worsens. These men are victims of belief, chained to ignorance." His words, tucked into journals, waited for a world willing to listen. Inside the valley, tension grew. Younger men questioned the cost of blind sons. Jedediah's grip tightened, silencing them with threats of exile. Yet whispers of science crept in like wind under doorframes. Forrester's name became legend. Some brothers whispered it cautiously, imagining him as enemy. Others thought of him as unseen ally, a man beyond mountains who sought to explain their suffering without curses or spirits. Science itself became ghost in the valley, present though invisible. Each blind son became proof, though Jedediah twisted meaning into prophecy. But deep down, men wondered if Forrester's whispers held truth stronger than creed. The doctor's journals expanded into volumes. He calculated probabilities, writing of recessive traits, though words were unfamiliar to most men of his time. Still, he saw a pattern clear as winter tracks in snow. He concluded, "This valley is an isolated experiment. Each blind son is not curse nor blessing. He is mathematics carved into flesh, statistics written into blood." His handwriting shook with urgency and dread. But until the day authorities acted, Forrester remained only a whisper outside the mountains. His science could not pierce rifles or creed. The Caldwell men were trapped between superstition and truth unspoken. And so, the whispers of science hovered like smoke, invisible yet suffocating. They promised answers, but brought no escape. The valley remained a prison of belief, as blind sons multiplied in silence. Beyond the ridges, the nation shifted violently. Armies marched overseas, factories roared with steel, and cities swelled with workers. Yet inside the Caldwell Valley, silence lingered, untouched by the thunder of distant war. The brothers heard vague rumors from traders. They learned of battles fought across oceans, of soldiers storming beaches under fire. But to Caldwell men, such stories felt like echoes from another planet. Jedediah dismissed these tales. He told his sons that wars of outsiders meant nothing to men of pure blood. "Let them kill each other," he growled. "Our kingdom stands eternal behind these mountains." The valley remained frozen in time. Cabins leaned against cold winds, smoke curled into gray skies, and blind suns tapped along walls. To outsiders, decades passed. For Caldwell men, each day repeated endlessly. While America sent sons to distant fronts, Caldwell's sons were bound by creed. Their rifles hunted deer, not enemies. Their loyalty was sworn to patriarch and bloodline, not to flag or nation. Jedediah claimed the war confirmed his beliefs. "See how outsiders destroy themselves," he said. "Our blood is untouched by their madness." The men nodded, though many secretly wondered what world truly lay beyond. The valley bridge collapsed in a storm, severing the last easy path. For Jedediah, it was blessing. "Now outsiders cannot tempt us," he declared. For his sons, isolation deepened into permanent prison. Blind boys grew into men, learning to navigate without sight. They walked familiar trails by sound, fished by feel, and listened to brothers' footsteps. Their survival was remarkable, yet sorrow never lifted entirely. Storms battered roofs, crops withered, and hunting became harder. Yet still, no Caldwell man sought outside aid. Jedediah's voice thundered, "Weak men beg outsiders, strong men endure with blood unbroken." No one dared challenge him. Meanwhile, entire nations transformed. Radios carried voices across states, airplanes shrieked through skies, and factories built machines never seen before. Caldwell men, cut off, knew none of it. Their valley remained bound to the 19th century. Dr. Forrester aged, still haunted by their plight. His warnings grew more desperate, but officials dismissed them as mountain rumors. While the world discovered penicillin and nuclear fire, Caldwell's sons stumbled through endless night. The gap widened. One world roared forward with technology, the other stood still in superstition. Caldwell men became relics of forgotten time, shaped by mountains into shadows of what progress could have made them. Younger brothers felt tension. Some longed to see beyond ridges, to know what machines and wars meant. Yet Jedediah crushed curiosity, declaring questions betrayal. To doubt the creed was to invite exile. Exile still meant death. Few trails offered survival without brotherhood. Wolves, hunger, and storms consumed wanderers. So men stayed, chained not by walls but by fear, as outside history thundered past without them. Blind sons adapted brilliantly, yet their existence was undeniable sign. With each generation, the toll deepened. Spines twisted, limbs bent. The creed demanded loyalty, but evidence screamed of decline carved into every newborn boy. The outside world never saw them. Inside the valley, silence covered despair. Brothers raised sons, guiding the blind through forests, teaching them skills. But every father carried quiet grief that purity meant suffering. As bombs fell overseas, Caldwell men watched only stars above their valley. They wondered faintly about the world beyond, but no road remained. The bridge gone, their isolation was now total, unbreakable. Jedediah grew older, but his grip never weakened. He shouted sermons even when breath came shallow. His sons feared him more than foreign armies, more than storms, more than blindness creeping through generations. The war ended. Nations celebrated. Factories expanded. The valley heard nothing. Caldwell men cut wood, hunted deer, and bowed to patriarch. Their world had not changed, though the outside world had transformed beyond recognition. For historians, this contrast later became haunting symbol. A valley where time stood still while civilization leaped forward. The Caldwell men were prisoners of their creed, deaf to progress, blind to opportunity. Forrester wrote bitterly in his journals. Entire nations rebuild, yet these men remain trapped in ignorance. Their sons suffer, not from war, but from belief stronger than bullets. His frustration filled every line. Isolation grew not just physical, but spiritual. Caldwell men stopped questioning altogether. They accepted blindness as destiny, deformities as prophecy, and Jedediah's word as eternal truth. Their silence became their shield and their curse. The world beyond mountains entered Jet Age. Caldwell men still rode mules, plowed thin soil, and patched cabins with timber. While nations launched rockets, they carried water from streams with wooden buckets. Every blind sun symbolized the chasm widening between valley and nation. Yet within their world, they were taught to see themselves as chosen. Jedediah's voice carved illusions stronger than any science outside. The Valley of Shadows grew darker, not from absence of light, but from refusal to change. Blindness spread, traditions hardened, and war passed unnoticed. For Caldwell men, time was not river, it was cage. And so, while the world burned and rebuilt, the Caldwell brothers remained untouched. Their untouched state was no triumph, but tragedy. A world where loyalty demanded blindness, and where blindness became destiny itself. Among Jedediah's many nephews was Samuel Caldwell, a man restless beneath the weight of his patriarch's creed. Unlike others, Samuel listened quietly, yet carried doubts stronger than the mountains that surrounded their valley. He watched blind sons stumble through cabins, guided by uncles and brothers. He saw fathers masking grief beneath forced pride. He heard Jedediah thunder sermons, but felt truth pressing harder with each deformed birth. Samuel's doubts grew dangerous. Jedediah tolerated no questioning. Yet within Samuel burned a conviction. Survival demanded change. He could no longer believe blindness was destiny or deformities were blessings. He longed for knowledge. By night, Samuel walked the ridges, staring beyond the valley. He wondered what lay across rivers, towns, and roads he'd never seen. Unlike others, he felt walls were prisons, not protection. The destruction of the bridge weighed heavily on him. To Jedediah, it was salvation, but to Samuel, it was cage locked tight. He whispered to himself, "I must see beyond." Whispers of science reached his ears through traders. Stories of Dr. Forrester intrigued him deeply. Unlike Jedediah's myths, Forrester's words hinted at answers. Samuel dreamed of finding the doctor and learning the truth, but betrayal meant death. Jedediah punished dissent mercilessly. Samuel knew if his intentions were discovered, exile or execution would follow. Yet fear could not outweigh the gnawing voice inside urging escape. Storms battered cabins one spring. Rivers swelled, wolves prowled, and crops failed. Amid chaos, Samuel found opportunity. While brothers repaired roofs, he slipped toward the river, eyes fixed on currents carrying possibility. Crossing was madness. The water surged violently, but Samuel knew it was his only chance. He clutched a log, praying silently, and launched himself into the freezing torrent beneath a stormy sky. The river fought savagely, dragging him under. Branches struck his face. Water filled his lungs. Yet Samuel kicked, clawed, and clung to the log until, battered and breathless, he crawled onto distant shore. Exhausted, he collapsed, coughing violently. Behind him, mountains loomed, dark and heavy. Before him stretched unknown land, filled with roads he'd never walked. For the first time, Samuel stood outside Jedediah's cage. He staggered into town, soaked and bruised. Men stared at his rough clothes, his strange accent, his haunted eyes. He was living proof of the hidden valley, carrying secrets in every scar. Samuel sought Dr. Forrester. The aging physician nearly wept when the young man appeared. Finally, after decades of frustration, someone had escaped the Caldwell Valley to confirm his suspicions. Samuel told everything. He spoke of blind sons, twisted spines, and Jedediah's sermons of purity. He described punishments, exiles, and silence. Forrester filled pages with furious notes, every word proof that his warnings were true. The doctor promised Samuel safety. He vowed to bring officials, to act decisively this time. Samuel, relieved, felt weight lift from his chest. For the first time, he believed change might come. But danger remained. Jedediah's men soon discovered Samuel missing. Trails showed his departure. Rage consumed the patriarch, who declared Samuel traitor. Brothers armed themselves, preparing to defend secrecy against any intrusion Samuel might cause. Forrester alerted state authorities, describing urgent crisis. For once, officials listened. Perhaps war's end had hardened them to act. A prosecutor organized expedition, determined to confront Jedediah and rescue the suffering Caldwell sons. Samuel guided them toward hidden trails. He knew the valley's defenses, the rifles waiting. Still, he pressed on, convinced salvation for his brothers outweighed his fear of confrontation. His courage carried them forward. Inside the valley, Jedediah rallied men with fiery speeches. "Outsiders march upon us," he thundered. "They come to steal our strength. Defend the blood, purity above all." Rifles were raised, loyalty demanded once more. The clash was inevitable. Authorities entered the valley with Samuel at their side. Gunfire erupted, echoing through ridges. Jedediah fell in the chaos, his reign shattered, his creed silenced by bullets and smoke. Sons and brothers were seized, carried out under armed guard. Blind men stumbled, confused by sudden change. Stronger brothers wept openly, realizing fortress of purity had collapsed into ruin within hours. For Samuel, victory was bittersweet. He saved his brothers from endless cycles, but at cost of bloodshed. He knew many would curse his name, yet history would mark him as the one who defied. Doctors examined the men. Reports documented deformities with clinical detail: blindness, spinal curvature, twisted limbs. "It is as though nature performed an experiment on these men," one physician wrote, horrified yet fascinated. Samuel read these reports with sorrow. They confirmed what he already knew. Suffering had been avoidable. Ignorance, isolation, and creed had forged tragedy. Yet now, at last, there was chance for change. Officials debated what to do. Some wanted permanent institutions. Others argued for freedom. Samuel fought to ensure his brothers were treated as men, not specimens. His defiance carried into every meeting and report. The Caldwell Valley was confiscated, left empty, its cabins abandoned. Forests crept over fields, erasing signs of generations. The Valley of Shadows became ghost land, a warning written into silence of trees. Samuel, though haunted by guilt, found strength in purpose. He vowed to keep telling the story, to ensure no other brotherhood would ever suffer blindly for creed disguised as strength. His escape shattered chains older than himself. It proved one man's defiance could pierce mountains, silence a patriarch, and drag truth from darkness into light. Samuel Caldwell became legend, the brother who chose freedom. Dawn broke cold over the Appalachian ridges as armed officials prepared to march. Samuel Caldwell stood among them, his face pale but resolute. He knew his brothers waited inside with rifles and fear. The men of law carried warrants, weapons, and determination. They had read Forrester's reports, heard Samuel's testimony, and could no longer ignore decades of silence. The Caldwell Valley was to be entered by force. Samuel led them along hidden paths, his steps steady though his heart thundered. Every ridge and hollow carried memory. He knew where his brothers would stand, where rifles would gleam behind logs. Inside the valley, Jedediah Caldwell rallied his men. His booming voice echoed through cabins, declaring Samuel traitor and outsiders invaders. Brothers sharpened blades, loaded rifles, and swore oaths to defend creed with blood. The first shots rang out when officials reached the timberline. Smoke erupted from Caldwell rifles, bullets tearing bark. Officials returned fire, their volleys shattering silence that had hung for generations. The raid had begun. Men screamed, rifles cracked, splinters flew from cabins. For outsiders, it was enforcement. For Caldwell men, it was apocalypse. Centuries of isolation ended not with words, but with explosions echoing through mountains. Jedediah strode into battle despite age, rifle in hand, beard whipping in wind. He bellowed commands until a bullet struck, dropping him where he stood. The patriarch fell, his creed collapsing with him. Chaos followed. Some Caldwell brothers fought fiercely, firing until ammunition ran dry. Others dropped rifles, stunned by thunder of modern weapons. Fear overcame loyalty as the valley filled with smoke and death. Samuel watched from behind the line of officials. He wept silently as his brothers fell, torn between guilt and resolve. His choice had brought freedom, but also bloodshed he could never forget. When the smoke cleared, bodies lay across muddy ground. Jedediah was dead, several sons beside him. Survivors, stunned and shaking, were bound by rope. For the first time, outsiders walked freely into the valley. Officials searched cabins, documenting conditions. They found blind sons stumbling in confusion, guided by uncles. They discovered twisted spines, crooked limbs, and journals carved into wood praising purity above all. Each sight deepened their resolve. Dr. Forrester entered with trembling hands. He examined blind men gently, his eyes wet with grief. His warnings, ignored for decades, now stood undeniable in flesh and bone. Science had been proven by tragedy. Reports were written with precision. 32 men recovered. 14 display severe deformities, cases of congenital blindness, skeletal malformation, and intellectual impairment widespread. Isolation and intermarriage confirmed as cause. His words marked Caldwell legacy forever. Survivors were transported under guard. Some cried openly, others remained silent. Blind brothers clung to guiding arms, bewildered by sudden change. The valley that had been their world was now stripped of power. Officials debated treatment. Some argued institutions, others suggested rehabilitation. Samuel demanded dignity for his brothers. "Do not cage them again," he pleaded. "They have suffered chains long enough." His voice carried weight among witnesses. The Caldwell Valley was sealed off. Authorities marked it dangerous ground. Cabins were left to rot, fields abandoned. Nature soon reclaimed what had once been fortress of creed, swallowing history beneath vines and trees. For Samuel, the raid ended one chapter but began another. He bore scars of betrayal, yet believed freedom worth the cost. His defiance had shattered a dynasty built on silence and superstition. Officials hailed the raid as triumph of law over ignorance. Newspapers reported hidden clan exposed. Yet behind headlines lay sorrow. Brothers had died, and blind men were paraded as evidence rather than treated as kin. Dr. Forrester struggled with guilt. He had long sought intervention, yet witnessing results filled him with shame. "Science may explain," he whispered. But no explanation eases suffering etched into these men. Samuel refused to let memory fade. He visited his brothers in holding centers, speaking of better futures. Though some despised him as traitor, he knew history would vindicate his choice. The raid became case study. Universities dissected every detail, doctors debated genetics, and officials cited the Caldwell tragedy in health policies. But for the men themselves, it was no study. It was life. Blind brothers adapted slowly. Some learned cane walking, others learned Braille under guidance of instructors. Their resilience amazed physicians, but Samuel knew it was born not of choice, but necessity hammered by isolation. The Valley of Shadows became legend whispered in towns. Hunters avoided its trails, calling it cursed ground. But Samuel reminded them it was not curse, only consequence of creed defended too fiercely. Over time, memories of the gunfire faded into history. Yet Samuel never forgot the smoke rising over cabins, the sight of Jedediah's body, and the silence that followed collapse of a dynasty. He carried guilt for blood spilled, but pride that truth was finally known. His choice to escape had unleashed storm, but also light. The raid had ended darkness, though scars would never heal. After the raid, the Caldwell men were dispersed into institutions and clinics. Doctors crowded around them, eager to document their conditions. For science, the tragedy was opportunity. For survivors, it was humiliation wrapped in curiosity. Blind brothers sat under bright lamps as physicians examined sockets sealed by skin. Skeletal deformities were measured with calipers. Every abnormality was charted carefully. To outsiders, it was data. To Caldwell men, it was shame. One physician, Dr. Harold Jenkins, studied them with determination. He suspected a recessive trait passed through generations of consanguinity. "This is congenital anophthalmia," he declared, identifying the complete absence of eyes from birth. Jenkins compared rates to general populations. Where blindness occurred rarely elsewhere, among Caldwell men it appeared in nearly 1/3 of births. "This is staggering frequency," he wrote, a warning about dangers of prolonged inbreeding. Scientific journals seized the findings. Articles cited the Caldwell case as example of genetics in extreme isolation. Diagrams of pedigrees were drawn, tracing brothers marrying cousins, uncles marrying nephews' sons, bloodlines looping endlessly inward. The Caldwell men, meanwhile, were stripped of dignity. Scientists referred to them as specimens rather than individuals. Some brothers recoiled, refusing cooperation. Others endured, hoping answers might prevent future generations from similar suffering. Samuel Caldwell pushed back against exploitation. He demanded they be treated as men, not experiments. "Do not forget these are brothers, not beasts," he argued. His words challenged the detached coldness of laboratories. Despite ethical debates, discoveries multiplied. Researchers at universities dissected blood samples, searching chromosomes for anomalies. Eventually, suspicion settled on the X chromosome, where a recessive mutation appeared responsible for missing eyes among Caldwell's sons. The condition's mechanism was explained simply. 2 carriers producing a son had high chance of blindness. In isolated clans, such pairings repeated endlessly, amplifying defect until it became terrifyingly common. Scientists called it the Caldwell mutation. For decades, textbooks referenced the case as demonstration of how isolation magnifies recessive traits. What had been whispered superstition was now explained by molecular logic. But this clarity brought discomfort. While doctors celebrated discoveries, Caldwell men endured stigma. Newspapers sensationalized them as eyeless clan, reducing their humanity to headlines. For survivors, scientific fame felt like another prison. Forrester, old and frail, read the findings with bittersweet satisfaction. His suspicions were confirmed, yet he mourned how long it had taken. "These sons suffered because knowledge arrived too late," he wrote in trembling script. The Caldwell brothers became unwilling pioneers of genetics. Their tragedy accelerated understanding of heredity, yet they themselves reaped no benefit. Many spent years confined, labeled curiosities rather than recognized as men with dignity. Samuel continued advocating for them. He urged officials to use findings for education. "Tell other mountain men what blindness comes from," he insisted. "Do not let creed destroy more generations." Pamphlets were eventually distributed in rural regions. Simple diagrams showed recessive traits passing through brothers. Though crude, they carried powerful message. Repeated consanguinity brings suffering. Samuel ensured Caldwell pain became warning rather than forgotten horror. Still, scars remained. Caldwell men in institutions faced ridicule. Some instructors mocked their blindness, others paraded them before students. Samuel fought constantly, reminding authorities that science without respect became cruelty disguised as progress. In journals, researchers praised the extraordinary natural laboratory presented by the Caldwell case. Samuel despised the phrase. To him, his brothers were not experiments, but survivors of creed and ignorance older than himself. Despite objections, discoveries continued. By 1950s, molecular research advanced rapidly. Caldwell blood samples contributed to mapping hereditary conditions, though their names were seldom acknowledged. Their suffering remained background to triumphs celebrated by scientists. The irony weighed heavily. Blind sons who stumbled through cabins became architects of modern genetics, though they never chose such fate. Their existence shaped textbooks, but their lives remained marked by shadows. Samuel aged, carrying burden of memory. He spoke at universities describing creed, blindness, and raid. Young doctors listened, inspired by science, yet often missing humanity at heart of his testimony. Still, some heard him. A few physicians began treating survivors more compassionately, offering training, canes, and braille. These small gestures mattered. They proved progress was possible not only in science, but in empathy. Caldwell brothers adapted slowly. Some learned trades, weaving baskets or carving wood. Others found solace in music, guided by hearing sharper than most. They survived not as specimens, but as men forging new identities. Science had named the curse, traced mutation, and warned the world. Yet for survivors, the story was not charts or pedigrees. It was years lost, brothers buried, and memories of sermons promising strength. The lesson remained stark. Isolation magnifies weakness. Creed can blind more surely than genetics, and progress without compassion repeats cruelty. Caldwell men embodied all three truths, carved into flesh by generations. As decades passed, their story became legend, but Samuel ensured truth survived. He spoke not of monsters or curiosities, but of brothers trapped by belief, freed too late by science and sacrifice. The curse had been named, yet names could not heal. What healed, slowly, was acknowledgement. That these men deserved more than pity, more than data. They deserved to be remembered as men. After the raid, silence lingered among Caldwell survivors. They had been uprooted from cabins, torn from mountains, and placed under institutional roofs. Yet their voices, long suppressed by creed, began to find release. Samuel Caldwell encouraged them to speak. He urged brothers to share memories not as curiosities, but as testimonies. "Tell the world what creed demanded of us," he said. "Let truth replace silence." Blind brothers recalled childhoods guided by sound. One described recognizing each man by footsteps. Another spoke of learning rivers by currents against his hands. These details revealed resilience hidden beneath deformity. Their words carried sorrow, too. Brothers described punishments for doubt, sermons of purity and fear of exile. Some admitted they had wanted to escape long before Samuel, but terror chained them to silence. One brother recalled hearing Jedediah declare him prophet because of blindness. He said, "I saw inward, but I saw only darkness. I wanted to shout truth, but my tongue was bound by fear." Another spoke of hunger during winters. He described foraging for bark and acorns while patriarch boasted of strength. Strength tasted like starvation. He muttered bitterly. His voice shook, but he continued telling his story. Doctors recorded these testimonies. For science, they were data points, but Samuel insisted they be archived as human accounts. "Do not reduce us to charts," he warned. "We are men, not numbers." In interviews, survivors revealed contradictions of life in Valley. They spoke of loyalty to brothers, yet hatred for creed. They described pride in endurance, but grief for blind sons born into suffering. One blind survivor explained how he had memorized every cabin floorboard. "Each creak told me where I stood. That was my map. My blindness trained me, but I never called it blessing." Another spoke of nights around fire. We sang about strength, but when songs ended, silence swallowed us. We feared what would come with next birth. His words cut deeper than medical reports. Samuel listened to every account, often with tears. He knew their suffering firsthand, but wanted each man's truth preserved. "History must hear your voices," he said. "Only then will silence break forever." Testimonies revealed hidden cruelty. Some blind boys were forced into arranged unions with uncles to preserve blood. These men described confusion and shame, realizing later their lives had been dictated by obsession, not destiny. Historians later called these confessions the Caldwell Chronicles. They offered rare glimpse into closed brotherhood where creed erased individuality. Each voice was both wound and weapon, exposing darkness patriarchs had cloaked in ritual. Survivors also expressed resilience. Some described learning crafts by touch, others spoke of sharpening hearing to hunt or carve wood. They proved blindness had not erased their worth, only reshaped how they endured. One blind man described guiding younger brothers through woods, teaching them to listen for squirrels or rivers. "I could not see, but I could lead," he said proudly. His voice carried unexpected authority. Through these voices, the Caldwell men reclaimed dignity, stripped by science and newspapers. They were not specimens or legends. They were storytellers, reclaiming history that had once been stolen from them. Samuel compiled recordings, depositing them in archives. He wanted future generations to hear unfiltered truth. "Let them know what creed costs," he insisted. "Let no brother suffer blindness of body and belief again." Doctors reluctantly acknowledged value of testimonies. Charts revealed patterns, but voices revealed humanity. The combination of both ensured Caldwell case became not only genetic study, but moral lesson etched into collective memory. In institutions, blind brothers formed support groups. They shared techniques, laughed at memories, and sometimes wept together. Their voices carried beyond walls, reaching officials who finally understood suffering behind statistics. One blind survivor reflected, "We thought we were chosen. Now I know we were victims. But victims can still speak. My voice is my weapon against forgetting." His words inspired others to speak. Newspapers eventually printed excerpts of testimonies. Readers were struck by raw honesty. Sympathy replaced ridicule for some. Others reacted with discomfort, unwilling to confront cruelty hidden within mountains. Yet truth spread steadily outward. Samuel stood by every brother. He ensured their names were remembered as men who endured, not as faceless victims. His dedication turned testimonies into legacy, preserving their strength beyond shadows of valley. Survivors' voices also influenced law. Policymakers cited their stories when funding rural health initiatives. "Isolation kills," Samuel reminded them. "It kills through silence, through blindness, through creed disguised as tradition." His words carried weight. In time, Caldwell testimonies became required reading in medical ethics courses. Students learned not only about genes, but about consequences of treating men as specimens. Their voices reshaped how science approached human suffering. Blind brothers grew old, some passing quietly in institutions, yet their voices lived on in recordings and transcripts. Each testimony ensured Valley of Shadows would not fade into forgotten silence. The power of survivors' voices was undeniable. They transformed tragedy into caution, silence into education. Their words ensured the Caldwell legacy was remembered not as myth, but as lived experience carved into history. When Caldwell survivors were first examined, they were treated as curiosities. Doctors spoke about them in conferences as cases, not men. For many survivors, the humiliation of objectification was as painful as blindness itself. Samuel Caldwell confronted this directly. He told physicians, "These are not specimens. These are my brothers." His voice carried authority forged in sacrifice. He demanded respect where once only clinical detachment existed. At first, many scientists resisted. They argued data required objectivity, but Samuel countered, "Objectivity without humanity is cruelty." His defiance forced some to reconsider, shifting discussions from deformities toward lived experiences of real men. Survivors themselves supported this shift. They spoke openly about desires, fears, and memories. They reminded outsiders they were not laboratories of flesh, but individuals with dignity, resilience, and voices long denied by creed. One blind survivor declared, "Do not write me as condition. Write me as man who survived condition." His words echoed through lecture halls, challenging young doctors to reframe how they viewed patients. Over time, attitudes began to change. Physicians who once charted deformities now recorded testimonies alongside diagrams. Case studies included direct quotes, ensuring voices of survivors became as important as scientific observations. This transformation marked a turning point. Caldwell men were no longer faceless data. They were remembered as storytellers, teachers, and advocates. Their presence challenged boundaries between science and humanity, forcing reconciliation between knowledge and respect. Institutions adapted slowly. Where once blind brothers were paraded before students, now they were invited to speak. Their stories were presented not as oddities, but as warnings about consequences of isolation and dogma. One lecture featured Eyeless, blind since birth. He told students how he memorized steps of every cabin, hunted by sound, and endured sermons of purity. The audience listened in silence, shaken by his humanity. Doctors admitted privately that survivors taught them more about resilience than textbooks. "These men endure without sight, without freedom, yet with dignity intact," one physician wrote. "They remind us medicine is about people, not only genes." Samuel continued pressing boundaries. He published essays demanding reform in medical ethics. His words circulated widely, shaping debates about consent, dignity, and treatment of vulnerable populations. Caldwell's suffering became foundation for better practices nationwide. Survivors gained confidence through recognition. Blind brothers who once whispered now spoke boldly in assemblies. They found purpose as educators, warning others against repeating mistakes. Their identities expanded beyond tragedy into active contributions. Craftsmanship became another form of reclaiming dignity. Brothers carved wood, wove baskets, and played instruments. These works were displayed not as curiosities, but as art, proof they were creators, not merely subjects of pity. Some blind men even became instructors, teaching skills to others in institutions. They guided younger blind boys from unrelated backgrounds, turning personal suffering into service. Their role shifted from burden to mentor. Samuel described this shift as rebirth. "Once creed defined us, then science defined us. Now we define ourselves," he said. His words captured essence of transformation from specimens into men. Historians later noted this moment as crucial. It marked when survivors seized narrative, shaping how they were remembered. The Caldwell legacy stopped being purely genetic case study and became lesson in resilience and dignity. Public perception shifted too. Articles began portraying them not as monsters but as survivors of ignorance. Readers empathized with brothers robbed of choice. Sympathy replaced ridicule in many circles, though prejudice lingered in others. Educational materials evolved. Medical schools taught Caldwell case with emphasis on ethical failures as well as genetic insights. Students learned importance of compassion, recognizing men behind mutations. Caldwell voices reshaped medical education permanently. Survivors also influenced policy. Their testimonies supported laws improving conditions in institutions. Legislators cited their experiences when demanding oversight. In this way, Caldwell men transformed private suffering into public change, benefiting countless others. One blind survivor summarized, "Our tragedy built bridges. Bridges of knowledge, bridges of empathy. We paid price, but others may walk safer path because we spoke. His statement encapsulated purpose of their resilience. By refusing silence, they reclaimed identity. No longer hidden in valley or confined in laboratories, they emerged as advocates. Each story defied stigma, replacing objectification with recognition of humanity carved through endurance. Samuel carried this mission until his final years. He ensured archives preserved recordings, crafts, and testimonies. "Do not remember us as cursed," he insisted. "Remember us as men who endured creed and ignorance." For doctors, Caldwell voices became mirror. They forced confrontation with uncomfortable truths. Science often dehumanized subjects, and progress sometimes came at cost of dignity. This reflection shaped new codes of conduct worldwide. In time, Caldwell survivors grew older, their numbers dwindling. Yet their influence expanded, carried by students, doctors, and historians. They proved transformation possible, from shadows to light, from specimens to men. The Valley of Shadows no longer imprisoned them. Though scars remained, their voices broke silence. Their dignity reclaimed space once dominated by creed. They had endured blindness, betrayal, and exploitation, yet still found purpose. Their legacy outlived them. Generations of physicians remembered not only mutation, but men behind it. The Caldwell story became lesson repeated endlessly. Every statistic hides a voice, and every voice deserves to be heard. From specimens to men, this was their journey. A transformation forged not by science alone, but by courage, advocacy, and refusal to remain silent. In the end, dignity triumphed where creed once reigned. Decades after the raid, the Caldwell story remained etched into Appalachian memory. Cabins had rotted, paths grown wild, yet whispers lingered. Men who once lived in shadows had left behind a haunting legacy. Samuel Caldwell devoted his later years to shaping that legacy. He founded a foundation for genetic awareness, producing pamphlets in plain language to warn isolated communities about dangers of repeated unions among brothers. He traveled across mountain towns, speaking before gatherings of men in church halls and barns. His words were simple but powerful. Knowledge could have spared us blindness. Ignorance chained us to suffering. Some mountain men resisted, clinging to pride. Yet others listened carefully. Samuel's scars gave credibility no scientist could match. His testimony carried the weight of lived truth, not detached theory from laboratories. Historians noted how his mission transformed the Caldwell story from tragedy into cautionary tale. What once symbolized superstition now educated countless men, preventing repetition of creed disguised as tradition. Survivors who adapted outside institutions supported Samuel's mission. Blind brothers taught cane walking, reading Braille, and carving crafts to younger generations. They transformed their suffering into guidance, embodying strength beyond their condition. Officials eventually recognized the importance of their efforts. Federal programs funded rural outreach, citing Caldwell case as catalyst. Doctors carried educational posters into valleys, breaking silence that once allowed tragedy to fester. Newspapers occasionally revisited the story. Articles shifted tone over years, portraying Caldwell men less as oddities and more as survivors who had converted pain into purpose. Public sympathy grew steadily with each retelling. The abandoned valley became symbol itself. Travelers who braved its paths described collapsing cabins swallowed by vines. Forests reclaimed farmland, turning once feared fortress into eerie reminder of creed that destroyed generations. Samuel walked those ruins once more before his death. He traced fallen beams, remembered voices of blind brothers, and whispered, "We endured, but the land remembers too." His visit sealed Valley's role as memorial. Historians later called the valley America's silent warning. It represented consequences of isolation, superstition, and neglect. Tourists rarely visited, yet its legend spread widely through classrooms, journals, and documentaries. Survivors' legacies extended into science as well. Researchers cited Caldwell mutation when mapping hereditary blindness. Their bloodlines advanced genetics, though men themselves had gained little. Still, their contribution outlived them in laboratories worldwide. One scientist remarked, "The Caldwell case taught us more than data. It taught humility." He acknowledged mistakes of early researchers who reduced brothers to specimens. Lessons in ethics were as valuable as genetics. Samuel's advocacy inspired younger men from isolated regions. They chose to seek education, travel outward, and marry beyond valleys. His example encouraged them to avoid repeating choices that once sealed Caldwell fate. Even among Caldwell descendants scattered across states, memory persisted. Some carried mutations silently, but awareness spared them repeating creed. Knowledge prevented tragedy, fulfilling Samuel's dream of turning suffering into shield for others. Monuments were never built in stone, but in words. Archives preserved testimonies, museums displayed artifacts, and universities taught lectures. The Caldwell legacy lived not in statues, but in voices and warnings. Blind brothers who survived longest became mentors until old age. They trained generations of blind youths unrelated to Caldwell blood. Their methods, sharpened by necessity, influenced national programs for visually impaired men. Thus, from tragedy emerged contribution. Suffering had been immense, but endurance transformed into service. Caldwell men proved resilience could outlast blindness, turning personal scars into guidance for others navigating similar darkness. Officials recognized Samuel posthumously, honoring him as advocate who bridged isolation and progress. His speeches were reprinted, his essays quoted. The brother who defied patriarch became remembered as man who carried truth outward. For Appalachia, the Caldwell legacy became part of cultural memory. Songs, stories, and documentaries recalled Valley of Shadows. Men told their sons about dangers of creed, ensuring silence would not return. Historians emphasized complexity. Caldwell men were not villains nor saints, but humans shaped by geography, fear, and obsession. Their legacy reminded audiences that isolation magnifies flaws, and unchecked authority breeds devastation. The abandoned valley stood as physical reminder. Trees grew through roofs, rivers eroded paths, yet echoes remained. Every creak of wood seemed to carry sermons of Jedediah. Every gust whispered voices of blind sons. Visitors described haunting stillness. No laughter, no rifles, only wind. Yet within silence lay message. Knowledge matters, compassion matters, and creed without reason destroys even strongest men. The valley taught by absence. As survivors passed into history, their voices remained through recordings and transcripts. Their words guided medicine, shaped policy, and inspired activism. The legacy in mountains outlived the men themselves, etched permanently into collective memory. The Caldwell name, once synonymous with secrecy, became associated with resilience and education. From darkness came illumination. From isolation came warning. From tragedy came legacy that stretched far beyond ridges once imprisoning them. Today, the valley stands empty but powerful. Its silence speaks louder than sermons ever did. It reminds all who hear of men who suffered blindness of eyes and blindness of creed. The legacy in the mountains is clear. Knowledge must be shared, silence must be broken, and dignity must never be surrendered to superstition. The Caldwell brothers, through suffering, gave the world this truth. Generations after Samuel Caldwell's defiance, the valley lay silent, reclaimed by forests. Yet its legacy pulsed outward. The Caldwell brothers, once trapped in creed, now lived on as symbols of resilience beyond darkness. Historians revisited their saga often. Lectures described their suffering not only as genetic caution, but as human reminder of dignity. Professors told students, "Behind every chart was a man. Never forget that." Doctors echoed similar sentiments. The Caldwell case remained cornerstone of medical ethics courses. Future physicians were taught that science must serve humanity, not reduce men to specimens. Caldwell brothers shaped this doctrine through lived sacrifice. In rural mountains, stories still circulated. Hunters spoke of ruined cabins swallowed by vines. Fathers warned sons about consequences of creed. Each retelling transformed tragedy into practical lesson for generations to come. Samuel's voice, preserved in recordings, guided countless listeners. His speeches carried urgency even decades later. "We endured blindness because silence reigned. Break silence, and you break chains." His message transcended his own time. The Caldwell survivors who lived longest became symbols of endurance. Blind brothers, once mocked, were celebrated in local communities as mentors. They trained younger blind men, transforming suffering into skills that improved countless lives. Government programs drew heavily on their example. Policies on rural health and genetic counseling often cited Caldwell case as turning point. Officials recognized their story proved the necessity of outreach, education, and compassion. Scientists, too, acknowledged debt. Geneticists, tracing hereditary blindness, referenced Caldwell bloodlines with reverence. Their data, though painful in origin, advanced treatments for others. From their misfortune, pathways to healing emerged for future generations. Beyond laboratories, artists and writers found inspiration. Poets described valley silence, musicians composed ballads about blind brothers, and historians wrote volumes. The Caldwell saga became part of cultural memory stretching beyond Appalachia. Yet survivors' greatest legacy was not art or science, but dignity reclaimed. They had endured sermons declaring them chosen, only to realize they were victims. Their courage transformed victimhood into defiance, silence into testimony. One blind man near death summed it simply: "We could not see, but we were never unseen again." His words resonated across archives, ensuring Caldwell's name carried weight beyond myth. The valley itself became memorial without monuments. Fallen beams, moss-covered stones, and overgrown paths spoke silently of creed's collapse. Visitors described eerie presence, as though every tree held memory of suffering. Historians emphasized the transformation, from hidden clan to global lesson. Caldwell brothers proved that even darkest isolation could be broken by truth, and that endurance of men could outlive blindness imposed by ignorance. Samuel's role remained central. His defiance had sparked cascade leading to raid, science, and reform. Without his escape, creed might have endured longer, and suffering multiplied. His courage reshaped destiny of generations. Though Samuel died long before final recognition, his advocacy ensured no Caldwell brother vanished into obscurity. His insistence on dignity outlasted patriarch's creed, embedding compassion at heart of their story. As time stretched, myths formed around them. Some spoke of eyeless prophets, others whispered curses. Yet scholars countered with truth, preserving accuracy. These were men, not myths, whose lives warned against blindness of creed. Modern documentaries revisited their tale. Narrators described Samuel's river crossing, Jedediah's downfall, and testimonies of blind brothers. Audiences worldwide listened, moved by resilience and shaken by cruelty. Their story transcended mountains, reaching across cultures. In classrooms, children studied them not with horror but with empathy. Teachers, all men in these retellings, spoke of dignity, resilience, and dangers of silence. The Caldwell saga shaped moral imagination. For descendants scattered far beyond valley, memory carried responsibility. Some bore mutations silently, but knowledge spared repetition. Awareness gave choice, ensuring creed would never again dictate suffering. Legacy became shield, not chain. Even in old age, surviving Caldwell men reminded listeners, "We are more than blindness. We are proof tradition without reason destroys." Their words carried force born of scars but tempered by wisdom. Historians concluded their story represented triumph of truth over fear. They described it as collision of superstition and science, isolation and progress. Yet above all, it was tale of men reclaiming humanity. The Valley of Shadows remains empty today. Wind whips through ruins, rivers carve deeper beds, and owls echo calls across ridges. Silence reigns, yet silence now speaks louder than patriarch ever did. Every visitor leaves changed. Some see tragedy, others see resilience. But all recognize message. No creed is worth blindness, no tradition worth suffering. The Caldwell brothers carved that truth into history. Their story continues not because of deformities, but because of courage. From specimens they became men, from shadows they became light. They remind us every life carries dignity beyond science or creed. Beyond darkness, their legacy endures. It lives in classrooms, hospitals, archives, and hearts of those who listen. Caldwell men, once trapped in valley, now guide world with lesson written in resilience. Thus ends the saga of the Caldwell brothers. Men who suffered, men who resisted, men who taught. From silence, they forged a voice that still echoes across mountains and time.